This is Prompting Potential, where we step into the world of entrepreneurs, innovators inside and outside of organizations who ignite inspiration, fuel innovation, and unleash imagination against all odds. Prompting Potential spotlights incredible individuals and influential ideas at the intersection of leadership, technology, and transformation. I'm Roger Rohatke, the Chief AI Officer at Chai, and you can find us at heychai.ai. All right, so welcome back to Prompting Potential. Today's guest brings a rare blend of technical depth, storytelling clarity, and pit lane level urgency. Cory Minton is the global CTO at Splunk, a Cisco company, and he works with some of the world's largest brands and companies to make complex systems more visible, more secure, and more intelligent. He's also partnered with McLaren F1, where data moves as fast as the cars and decisions that can't wait for dashboards. In this episode, we're going to talk about what real-time AI looks like, how human potential is amplified through intelligent systems, and why machine-generated data may just be the next great unlock. So let's get started. All right, so Cory, well, thank you so much for being here with us, and it's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. First, before we get started, really, at the end of, one thing I'm so fascinated about with you is, not only your technical abilities, your expertise, the presence that you bring everywhere you go, all the innovative ideas and the things that you're doing, but dude, your hats.
It's a signature look. I always joke it's a bald guy's accessory of choice. My wife gives me a lot. Actually, more my kids give me grief on the number of hats I own. But, you got to have a style and a look. And for years, the beard was enough. But I've decided that now the hat helps really round out the look.
Well, I'm loving the truth hat here. So I know what it means, but maybe share a little bit about that.
Well, so the funny thing is when you wear a hat like this that has a statement piece on it, like truth, people immediately think oh, this guy thinks he's telling the truth. But what they fail to realize, because you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, is that it's really about my love of barbecue. And actually here in Houston, Texas, there's a barbecue place called Truth. Actually started out in Brenham. I'm a huge barbecue geek. I'm actually a volunteer pit master for Operation Barbecue Relief.
Okay.
And so I've been in the barbecue game for a lot of years, trying to use that for good when there's disasters around the country to go serve people. But I had a chance last time I was here in Houston to go to Truth Barbecue and enjoy some of the best I've had in Texas. And candidly, the hat is too good because it says Truth on the back and Texas made or Truth on the front, Texas made on the back, and I am Texas made. So it worked out really nicely.
Oh man, I love it. Hey, same here. I was born here in Houston, and the fact that it's right here is great. So what's your go-to? I know they have these huge ribs, and then they have incredible brisket. What do you?
Brisket is obviously the kind of the bellwether in Texas, and I think that's an easy one. But I will say that one of my kind of key criteria for judging a barbecue place is actually their smoked turkey.
Okay.
That may not be a popular opinion, but in terms of challenges to make something really high quality, to retain the right moisture content, to get that right balance of black pepper and bark on a white piece of meat like that is really challenging. The ones who do it well, they're doing something right.
Man, I am getting so hungry right now as you mentioned that. But you're right. I mean, I used to work with a guy, and he was super into barbecue, obviously. And he traveled all over to all the different, events and stuff. And he, his whole way that he gauged how good a barbecue restaurant was the smoked turkey.
Yeah.
So
that's what the insiders know. If you know, you know.
Right. I mean, I love brisket, right? Yep. And so I've had some that's just like Pecan Lodge in Dallas. It's crazy, right? So it's 2.5 hour wait, right? So we get in there, and they call it the I guess the fatty part at the top, they call it the snot or something, right? Yeah. And man, I bit into that, and it was like a buttery sugar cookie meets this salty savory flavor, and it explodes in your mouth. I was like, what in the crap? I mean, I would have waited 2.5 days to get that,
Yeah. It's an incredible balance when you strike that sweet, heat, acid, smoke flavor. It's what makes barbecue so good. And then with Operation Barbecue Relief, we get to bring that to folks that are in need when there's disasters, there's hurricanes or storms. There's something about the healing power of barbecue for all of us.
Oh, I love that. So is there a website that people can go to?
OBR.org. That's a fantastic organization that actually serves first responders, people in need, partners with FEMA. The last deployment I did, we were actually cooking 75,000 meals a day in a cook operation down in Florida. So it is a massive operation that does a lot of good in the world.
Man, that is incredible. And it's around one of my favorite things, which is barbecue. So that's awesome. So Cory, as as we get into this, right, we're going to talk all sorts kind of tech. We're going to talk AI. We're going to talk about your role, and all those things, right? So before we get like deeper into dashboards and AI agents and data, I want to do something a little bit different that I think is really cool.
Okay.
And that is revolving around your involvement with McLaren F1, which is like super awesome. And you've been helping bring like real-time telemetry and Splunk's data, right? Intelligence right into the pit lane and the analytics track side, which blows my mind. Okay, how did that come about?
Yeah, fantastic. So Formula One is the single most technologically advanced sport on the planet. And so when we say technologically advanced, that is data-driven, right? Those cars are masterpieces of engineering. And anytime you have a masterpiece of engineering that's a high-value machine, you need to make sure that it's operating and performing at its best. And the way that Formula One teams do that is they have tons of sensors across the cars to actually measure what's happening at every layer, from the powertrain performance to tire degradation to aerodynamics to driver performance and inputs. And so that's just a data playground. And for a data geek and for an organization that I've worked for over a number of years that's data-driven, it was just a natural partnership. So about 6 years ago, we entered into a sponsorship relationship. And during that time, soon after, COVID happened. And so we were watching Formula One and excited about it. And then we weren't racing Formula One anymore. And so we couldn't continue kind of this story of how do we support on-premises racing, like actually at the racetracks, which does require a massive amount of infrastructure and digital systems to actually make sure those cars are performing well. And it actually shifted into esports. And what we didn't realize about esports was it's also a data playground. So Formula One, obviously teams compete in real life racing, but they now all compete in esports, which is driving simulators. So if you've said to your children, you can't make a living playing video games, we've lied to them. You actually can make a living. It's probably equally as likely as being a Formula One driver, but it is a thing. And so in the Formula One esports world, we realized that there was this missing component to strategy that they had in Formula One, and that was getting data about what was happening to the car. Even though this wasn't real life, it's a game. And so we actually worked during COVID because we were all home and tinkering with racing simulators in our house. We actually figured out ways to collect data out of these racing simulators in a similar way that they actually collect data about the car. So we could get similar performance data about the powertrain, about the damage on the car, the aerodynamics, the performance. And we actually worked with McLaren's esports team to give that back to them as a racing strategy analytics platform, all built in Splunk. That was really just a hobby project on the side. And the funny story was actually when they started that esports team, they had this crew of folks that were kind of a hodgepodge of, esports professionals and racing drivers. And when they really launched that program, they wanted a winning strategy. So they brought a strategist over from the F1 team, and he actually slid into our DMs on Twitter because he'd seen a bunch of the videos we posted. And he said, I think you can help me solve problems. So we partnered with them, brought the power of data to esports, and they actually won a championship the first year that we did it. And they said it was a lot about the data analytics strategy we executed in Splunk.
Okay. Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's super fun.
Yeah. So I've been in one of these like simulators. It was at an automotive museum out in LA. And I don't know if it's exactly the same ones that you've had, but I mean, it's incredible, right?
Incredible.
And
Cheers.
do you have one in your
I do have one in the house. And actually, we just launched a couple of them in our briefing center in San Jose that I spend a lot of time at. We actually invite customers to come in. And what's wild is it's a perfect demonstration of data at speed and scale. So we actually get from these racing simulators 300 metrics at 10 times a second sampling. And it is powerful in terms of a story of how do you deal with real-time data and turn it into actionable insight. And that's what I think all of us are after, is like, we're just trying to serve the needs of, people who are trying to make decisions. It's just really fun when it has to do with racing. And honestly, right now, it's really easy to be a McLaren Formula One fan because they keep winning everything. So life is good.
Yeah, no, and it can take you all over the world. I mean, I was in was it Abu Dhabi, right? And Abu Dhabi is incredible for many reasons. But one of it, I mean, they have the Ferrari World, which I'm sure you've been. It's like it's mind blowing.
Right there next to Yas Marina,
right? Exactly, right. So it's like the fastest roller coaster in the world, or whatever, and everything's like the number one thing there, right? But I also went out to the test track in the Yas, and they took us around and drove. We were paired with a race driver, and man, I don't know if a simulator could have fully prepared me for how fast and how that felt. It's incredible the way that their minds are switching so fast, the things that they have to calculate in their brains, I mean, can AI ever catch up to that? I mean, that level of
It's funny.
You know?
I actually had a chance to ask Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris that exact question. This time last year, we went over to the McLaren Technology Center and we asked them, do you think AI is coming for your job? Because that's something that, everybody's thinking about when they hear AI. They're like, oh, is it coming for my job? So I was like, hey, are the Formula One guys concerned about it? And candidly, they're not. They don't see it as a replacement to what they're doing. There's just a lot of variables that are challenging, and that candidly, the other side of it is, who wants to watch it? Like, I don't think we want to watch AI's race. It's not all that fun to see. We don't see that human performance side of it. Yeah. But AI does have a place in Formula One and in racing in general, because they're dealing with non-human data scale problems that you can bring some really powerful machine generated, data and AI telemetry tools to bear to make strategy decisions. But I don't think the guys have to worry about anything coming for their jobs just yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way their minds work is incredible. And I mean, it's just fascinating to be there, especially to be right. I mean, you were right there on the track, right next to the track, I guess, in the pit. I mean, tell us how that felt.
Yeah, it's a wild thing to see everything come together trackside, because what folks maybe don't see in Formula One is that there's obviously a massive factory somewhere at the headquarters that's doing all the innovative work to build these cars. There's teams of strategists and engineers that, yes, you do see some of them on track, but you don't see the 60 folks that are back at the headquarters that are looking at data coming from the track and feeding information back from a nice, quiet, lab-like location, because on site at track, it is chaos. I mean, there's teams running around, there's press, there's media, there's celebrities trying to, make sure that they show up on the Sky News broadcast. And so on track, it's just absolute chaos, and they need to have calm, cool, collected decision-making. So I think it is fun to see the chaos. It's fun to, smell the gas, smell the brake pads getting hot, and have the experience of racing in the cheering crowds. But when you really take it all in, Formula One is just this incredible story of, it's a team sport. And we've watched McLaren really invest in, over the last couple of years, human potential and human performance. And I would actually argue that the advancements they've made there probably had a bigger impact than, maybe some of the basic technical innovations they've had, is really how to extract that utmost human performance from each of their teams. And I think I've even heard Zach talk about that as an attributing factor to their success this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe we dig into that a little bit, when we talk about human performance and all that. I mean, the pressure is, like you just described it as, is so intense there right in the track. So, I mean, I'm sure there's lots of learnings that, we probably could get from, humans working with machines in high pressure situations, just like that,
For me, it's one of those, we break it down as a concept called agency, right? It's this concept of, as a leader, do you understand the technology tools that are available to you? Have you really thought meaningfully and deeply about what is it that I'm responsible for? What is the human intelligence that I bring to the table? And what can I outsource? What can I hand over to these tools and technology? What can I outsource to other parts of the team? And you have to have agency about your role. And so it's been fun to watch Formula One, to see each of the teams, from drivers understanding their role, to strategists understanding their role, to the engineering and mechanics teams, to the leaders understanding and really understanding how to partner with technology, how to adopt it, and having the agency to be aware of what are the things that really require human performance and human intelligence to make the right decisions. And so it's been fun to partner with them, to challenge them on, hey, here's ways you can use technology to drive better outcomes, but also to see, hey, this is just the areas where humans still win.
Yeah. And in that environment, milliseconds matter, right? Like, I mean, it's down to the millisecond, right? So, I mean, how do you translate that to, the way AI begins to, transform things with or even the way that we interact with it?
I always just bring it back to, like, outcomes. Like, what is the business outcome that matters? So in Formula One, the difference between winning and losing a race can be, milliseconds, as you said. But the reality is for pretty much every industry, there is some high risk sort of thing that if it separates good from bad. And so if it's a manufacturing organization, a few minutes of downtime may not sound like a big deal, but it can translate into millions of dollars of loss, which is what losing a race could translate to into Formula One. So I think it's, how does this high speed, low latency data access drive really good business outcomes, and having that laser focus on, let's really solve those really high impact challenges first. And then we can back into the ones that maybe don't have that clear connection to, a real problem that, like, leaders care about, right? Executives care about. And I think that's one of the lessons I've always learned in, technology initiatives or innovation is, like, having a really clear focus on the outcome and the why behind it, and not just building technology for the sake of technology, but building capabilities to drive real impact has been a real critical thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to learn even about team building and things like that. I mean, at one of the previous companies I was at, they brought in some of the team and some of the racers from I think it was a Jaguar team for the EV racing, right? So which is a whole brand new thing, right? With these electric vehicles that are out there now on the track, which is going to be probably the norm in the future. Just the sheer amount of technology that goes into it, but the team dynamics, right, and all that, it's pretty incredible, right?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, right, the Formula One teams now are judged on how quickly they can execute a pit stop.
Right.
And you want to talk about humans working together in concert. I mean, you've got 18 people over the wall that have to change all 4 tires, possibly make some adjustments to aerodynamics, and they do it in sub 2 seconds.
Wow.
And so it's that focus on human performance is like, how do you optimize your positioning? How do you optimize the ways in which you're working together? But then even go back, like, how do you actually prepare yourself? If you think about Formula One as a great example of, it's a traveling circus. They have 23 races on pretty much every continent. Wow. And so they're traveling like crazy. They're having to ship all these things. So they've really focused on even this human performance ideas. Like, how do we build, sleep schedules and supplemental activities and diet and exercise to extract the most from the people we have? So I think that's the idea is like, how can we use analytics and data to understand that human performance and then drive advancements?
Yeah, it's wild how important that is. I had a chance to be able to go to kind of an executive retreat or whatever. And, when you get there, they had all these coaches there. And, this facility, it's called Exos. They do they bring in, athletes from all over the world, and they train them, especially in our country. And, some of them become top draft picks or whatever. And, there's all these different celebrity athletes walking around their facilities and stuff. And it's incredibly, advanced in the way that they train these athletes, but they also bring in executives, right? So there's CTOs, CEOs, CFOs, and all sorts of kind of other leaders from really, well-known companies. And what I thought when I got there was, okay, we're going to do some, maybe, sure, they'll give us some workout routines, right? They'll coach us on, maybe it's team dynamics, but they went deep in sleep. That was a huge thing. I couldn't believe it. They even gave us some, special pillows and special things to sleep and things like that, and how important that is. And then they went deep on of course, diet and the mental stuff where you overcome. And at the end of it, we were doing, an ice,
you're not one of those that's putting your face in ice water at 4 a.m.
No. So they actually, they do a couple of things, but then you actually go in and, do an ice plunge, with your team. Oh, yeah. And it's pretty intense because you got to do it, you go into a warm pool, then you go into, a hotter pool, and then you go into the ice, right? And you have to stay in there mentally for X amount of time. And then you get out, you thaw out almost with all this, your body's reacclimating, and then you go back and do it again. Right. Yep. And, it may not seem, everyone knows that, they've heard the health benefits, but it may not seem like it's much, but having, that team there with you, having those, somebody coaching you and all that kind of stuff and those dynamics was, incredible. Yeah. But what I learned was that, to be at the top of your game, it's not just about what your expertise, how you deliver. It's about how you don't burn out. It's about how you sleep. It's about how you care for your body and how you care and balance everything in your life, and work with the right people to make sure that you're continuing to overcome. Right. So
yeah, absolutely. So I've actually adopted I do a lot of global travel as well and have for years. Yeah. And sleep is one of those. If you haven't tried Time Shifter, it's a research-backed application that actually you can give it your flight parameters, like when you're flying different places, and it actually starts to put you together a schedule of not only when you should sleep, which is critical, but things like, when you should be caffeinating or not, when you should be taking melatonin or not, when you should be protecting your eyes from UV light to really build those circadian rhythm adjustments that get you prepared for global travel. Because any of us that are, having to work in crazy hours and travel, you have to show up ready to go. And so I think that's the interesting story that comes from Formula One. It's it's this microcosm of fantastic human potential conversations, technology challenges that we get to overcome, opportunities opportunities to use AI. And then it doesn't hurt that your family and kids get to watch it and cheer for them. Exactly. And, get to enjoy racing as a fun motorsport.
Yeah. No, totally. Living the life for sure. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about you and your role and stuff and the company you're with now. So Splunk, right? So it was acquired by Cisco for, I think it's $28 billion.
Correct.
Something like that. That's not a small amount.
That's not a small amount.
So we'll probably get into a little bit more about what, Splunk is and how it integrated into Cisco and what that's like. But your role now is your new role is global CTO. So congrats on the new role.
Thank you very much.
And, very inspiring and well-deserved.
Thank you.
Maybe, it'd be cool to hear more about you, your story. Like how did you get to that role? Like what did you do to, navigate the waters to be able to be a part of this?
Yeah, so it's a very exciting role. So I'm working in really close collaboration with our new chief revenue officer. So it's a global CTO of our specialist organization in sales. And so my job is to help, really communicate what our company's doing from a strategy perspective out to the world. But I got here because I've been a student of technology for a lot of years. I actually, in college, I really warred against the idea of following all of my family into tech. As you well know, my sister's a technologist. Our parents were both deeply into technology, and I kind of warred against it. I was like, I'm going to fight it. I'm going to go into manufacturing engineering and, really set my own path. But the reality is the apple doesn't fall that too far from the tree. And so technology came calling, and I pivoted back into a very much an IT kind of role. After grad school, I actually went more into a kind of data technology positions with EMC. And it was really around that time when a lot of the big data technologies were being open sourced by the early web companies. So like in the late 2000s, early 2010s, Google and others were releasing information about what they were doing with big data. And it really interested me because what I recognized was there was a shift happening that was starting there, but I realized I was pretty sure it was going to eventually find its way into the enterprise and to the customers that I was serving in my role. And so I became a student of that game. I went and did a ton of research. I took a bunch of classes, got certified and hands-on in technology. I started building my own labs and really tinkering. And what I found out was people cared about what we were learning in this tinkering. And I started a blog and started kind of geeking out and sharing this stuff. And what I realized is I wanted to learn more. And sometimes you get to learn things in your job, but sometimes you have to take it into your own hands. And so I would start reaching out to these, interesting startup companies, and I would tell them, hey, I'm a, principal engineer and field CTO at EMC. I'm really interested in AI and big data and how this is, emerging. And they'd say, get lost. We don't want to talk to you. You're from this big company. Get out of here. Right. And so it actually prompted me to start a podcast called Big Data Beard. Because what I realized was not everything I was talking about really was important for my employer, but I realized that knowledge would be really important for me. And so we had this concept of, if we took the blog, turned it into a podcast, people might talk to us. And it turns out it was real. And we would call people back and we'd call those same companies and say, hey, my name's Cory and I'm the founder of Big Data Beard, a podcast covering all things big data. And they'd say, hey, you want to talk to our CEO and our founding CTO and the engineering team? I'm like, yeah. And so I just followed this journey through that podcast and through the rest of my career of being a student and trying to learn and research and understand what are the technologies that are emerging, how are they going to affect the world as we have it today, and really think about that kind of longer term, like in 2 to 3 years. Run those thought experiments of what am I going to be doing, and what are the companies that I'm serving, the businesses, the industries, what are they going to look like, and what are the steps that I can take between now and then to help get there. And I think that's been the storyline of my career, has been just trying to pay attention to those trends, helping to write the narratives of where we need to go, and encouraging people along the way, from engineering to go to market to sales and a lot of others, of how do we get there? How do we get where we're going? Not just how do we survive and thrive today. And so I'm really humbled to take this new role, moving from sort of a theater-based role to really leading as kind of the top technologist in our field organization to represent Splunk and Cisco in the field to analysts, partners, customers, and that kind of stuff. So it's hopefully just a continuation of a lot of the same stuff I've been doing.
Yeah, but it's huge, man, and really cool. And just on the note you mentioned, I mean, it's kind of in your DNA. Yeah. And you mentioned your sister Kelly, who I know, who's incredibly brilliant, as you know.
She's the smart one in the family.
Well, I mean, she blows my mind. I mean, she's just so innovative, right? Yep. And some of the stuff that she's brought to bear for the world now is experiencing it, and she's just been on the cutting edge of all that. So it's definitely in the DNA for sure. And so, The podcast, 150 episodes. Obviously it's done a ton of stuff like around the, you've had all sorts of kind of guests, impact, real conversations, early stage AI, data, all that stuff. And, the best part of it, you glossed over it really quickly, but the name, Big Data Beard, I think is so cool. How'd you even get to that name?
Well, honestly, it's pretty simple. We were into big data. We were, interested. I was tinkering in that world. It was really, we were kind of in an AI winter when we started this. We started around 2014, 15 timeframe, and AI was still, sort of a researcher's game. Big data was the enterprise term that everybody was talking about. Big data is going to change the world. We had just come out of the cloud computing sort of being the big story. And so we got into big data, and I realized I was going to talk about big data, and I have a beard. And so big data, beard work together. And it just so happened to be also a fantastic insurance policy to not have to shave, because now it's a brand.
Yes,
and so
exactly.
it's like an insurance policy for keeping a beard around.
Yeah.
So it's been really good. But honestly, it was like in the early days, we would go to these, they weren't even called AI conferences at the time. They were really big data conferences or sort of researchers. And it was like, we were going to these back when, if you were an AI researcher and you were presenting at one of these conferences, the way that they knew you weren't like in marketing was that you had cat pictures in your presentations. And so like going back then, like it was cool to be in those early stages where computer vision was just really coming online as things like YOLO came into being. And we were just starting to understand the technical capabilities. But I think it wasn't until this, in the last 4 or 5 years when we really started to understand the emerging use cases and how it can really be transformative, not just to researchers or scientists, but really to the world. And so it's been fun to watch it from both sides, from the old school days when it was researcher game and it was just about big data and organizations trying to figure out how to use it, to now it's real and it's being used. And to have had a seat at the table and had the chance to talk with some of the most innovative people in the world has been a real honor.
Yeah. So I want to dig into that. Yeah. And you're right. It's incredible to see the journey that, technology has taken over the years or whatever, the evolution of it. Yeah. As I seem to think, 1955, 70 years ago was the coining of the term artificial intelligence. So we're 70 years in. It's the anniversary this year, which I think is pretty cool. And they, that when they coined that at Dartmouth College and so many really interesting things about that time, 1955. That was when, William Shockley came, had the semiconductor, which started Silicon, and all that Valley and things. You had, so many different other aspects, of innovation going on, right? Which was really cool. MIT, had some breakthroughs. Bell Labs had some breakthroughs, right? And when you look at the history of where we are today, it's just been a short period of time where things have just, leaped into, where we are today. Even with our company, we're using computer vision for some really cool, vision agents and stuff like that. But just to think about like just 3-4 years ago, how far we've come, right?
Yeah.
And so you've probably had that same evolution in conversations you've had too, right? So with all the guests that you had on Big Data Beard, and so many different early innovators, what are some of the things that stuck with you that, that shaped your AI, your view of AI, and now that you're applying to AI now?
Yeah, I would say it's the biggest thing for me in terms of watching the innovation happen it's been kind of a fun example of basic performance engineering. And by that, I mean, AI has advanced because we've had the right confluence of macro technology innovations that have allowed it to unfold. So in order for AI to work in the modern context, we needed lots of data. So we have that. You need lots of computational horsepower, which that's been a big change over the last really 10 years is the processing capability. And then you need really good software that can orchestrate. How do you have access to lots of data? How do you get into a place where we can compute it? And then how do we have an outcome? And so I think the performance engineering part of it it's been fun to watch the bottlenecks move over time. And I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to play that same game of, yes, we now have the technology, we have the software, we have the computational horsepower, we have the models that are being built that are now unlocking incredible outcomes, but we have new challenges on the horizon. We have power challenges, specifically, here in the US, we're thinking about energy production for these modern AI data centers is going to be astronomical in terms of the increase in demand. But I think it's going to be really interesting. And what I've seen the innovators do over the last few years is get focused on those constraints, and it'll drive incredible outcomes. So I think you're going to see some things happen in, shrinking of models to where we change the computational paradigm. We shrink the amount of computational and energy required to drive the same outcomes by getting really smart. So I think that's one of the things I took away from the interactions I always had was it's chasing what is the real outcome that is the reason why you need the technology. And then once you build it, how do you optimize it over time and really remove those performance bottlenecks wherever they are, whether it's in the software stack, it's in the usage stack, it's in the, in the underlying infrastructure, to now it's even in the energy production side of it. So it's been fun. And I think there's going to be some interesting challenges ahead of us if we're going to have the outcomes that people want with AI today.
Yeah. And I mean, just clicking in or double clicking in on that energy, part that you just mentioned. I mean, obviously I was at BP, so I was like, definitely really deep into, that side of things. And, it's really the future, right? I mean, all this is dependent on energy. And, I've mentioned this before, but I think one of the stats I heard was like, the same amount of energy it takes to produce one or create one, AI generated video is equivalent to like 120 to 125 powering cell phones, right? So
really,
yeah. So I mean, like, that's going to change. Obviously, it's going to come down, but maybe not. Maybe it's just going to it grow because there's going to be more demand that's going to be placed on AI. So how do we find that delta? I mean,
Well, I think performance engineering has always been about understanding what's happening in the systems. And there's like this broad term in the industry we call observability, but it's like, how do you understand what's really happening at every layer of that stack that makes that outcome? So if you're a video producer and you want to produce great videos, you definitely want to use the capable services. But those services like Veo at Google or others, Sora at ChatGPT, they're underpinned by infrastructure at the end of the day. At the end of the day, these AIs are a digital system that's using some amount of data and inputs. It's using some computational framework that's orchestrated by some software, but it's running in a data center somewhere. And I think the way we get to this world of more efficient systems is really deeply instrumented in understanding the underlying technology and what it takes to drive that outcome, I think is going to be a really critical component. And it's one that I think we're just now starting to sense a demand in the market for a deeper understanding of things like the efficient use of NVIDIA GPU technology, right? It's one thing to say, I can go out and buy 1,000 of them and I can build a data center, but we really should start asking questions like, are they all operating at maximum efficiency? Are they operating in full utilization to where I'm getting the utmost from those investments? And I think those are the interesting performance challenges or engineering challenges that we have ahead. And then how big do the models need to be fit for purpose? And so I think each of those conversations are going to happen over time and unfold at different levels, but we can't do any of it if we don't deeply understand what's happening inside those systems. And I think observability is one of the key components to get there.
Yeah. Well, so let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about the other most important part about all of this was really like the way I view it as people, humans still.
For sure.
And, one of the concepts that we, talk about heavily here at Shy is that, we are, hopefully advancing what we call human-centered AI, right? So building AI around the human need, the human problem, and for humans, with humans, and so forth. And I really believe that at the end of the day, that kind of model really amplifies human potential. It really can create an incredible dynamic. I mean, one of the things that you and I have talked about, is my, concepts or theories I've been, exploring around the term multi-potentiality, right? Where we have multiple versions of our, self in the future that we could, use for a myriad of things, right? Because, multi-potentiality really defines us as we have multiple needs, multiple wants, multiple skills, gifts, abilities, and talents, but we have limited time, right? Limited resources. So the opportunity for us to be able to multiply ourselves through digital, twins or triplets or whatever, might be pretty, cool, but also quite the norm in the future, right? And so that amplification of human potential is something that I kind of want to go a little bit deeper in with you on. And I know that you've kind of talked about the term, the narrative around the fear-based AI, right? Fear-based view of AI, where AI is going to replace people, right? And you and I have talked about how I believe that not only will it amplify, but it's gonna, like we just talked about here, multiply. But there had to have been a moment probably where you might have seen the same thing or not, and you realized, hey, this isn't really going to replace people.
Yeah.
More actually, it's going to increase their capabilities.
Yeah. Well, it starts from a place where I just don't love fear as a motivator, generally speaking. Like I'd rather focus on hope. But I will say that I think as a technologist, I am highly aware of there's an economic principle called the lump of labor fallacy. And I've kind of thought about it for years because every time there's been a major technical innovation in the world, the folks who are against it, call them the Luddites, if you will, right, are basically have this idea that like this new technology is going to take your job. And while that's true in some cases that some of these technology advancements, whether it was the tractor, in the 1920s that was really changing the way farmers, it took the job of the horse, right? But it creates other new jobs. And that's the idea of the lump of labor fallacy, is that there's not a finite amount of work to be done in the world, and that any new technology advancement, while it may alter and it may make some jobs obsolete, largely the reality is that it unlocks new kinds of work that could be done to advance human potential, to improve the human condition. And so what I know in talking with folks who are responsible for, operating the IT and securing the environments for the world's largest governments and, most important brands and retailers and companies, is that they're all busy. Like they don't have enough time to get to the things that they really need to get to. And so I think that those advancements we're seeing in AI today isn't that it's necessarily going to take that many folks' jobs. I actually challenge people to be more aware that the reality is less likely that an AI will take your job, but it's that somebody who learns how to use AI to unlock their productivity will absolutely come for your job. And so I encourage people to think about it that way. It's like not put your head in the sand and be afraid that AI is going to come for your job, but get focused on adopting the technologies into your daily life. Have the agency to really understand what is it that makes you unique and the value that you create. And what are those mundane things that if you could offload those to somebody, and I oftentimes think of it as like, if you could hire an unlimited number of PhD, interns or assistants, what would you turn over to them? And what's the process that you would use to bring them online to help you? Start thinking about AI in that lens to help you become that AI-powered individual of the future that will be absolutely better at your job than anybody else. And I think that's a really critical shift in thinking, is like, don't be afraid. Be focused and go learn and be a student and tinker and understand how you can use these tools to unlock new productivity for you, because ultimately, that's how you're going to advance your career. It's going to how you advance your quality of life. And I can tell you personally, I've been using these tools to advance my capabilities and advance my productivity in ways that have absolutely separated me from peers who've, been unwilling to try.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I think that goes really in, right in line with some of the thinking I was having around, if I had these multiple versions of myself, and I've multiplied my abilities, and, maybe an AI agent is handling my basic tasks, but maybe it's also handling the PhD tasks. And maybe it's also handling my, personal life, my bills, my finances, my, maybe my business or my side hustle or whatever. Right. So, and then there's other things that I've done for my own work and outside of a company, right, that it's really increased or given me, a better advantage. And so, I had this thought that, companies then wouldn't be hiring you just for you, but they'd be hiring you for all the versions of you that come along with you.
Exactly.
And, they're all trained on your digital DNA, right?
Yeah. This is one of those, like, kind of a unique, I'll say, advantage, maybe an unfair advantage I have right now, is that in the podcast, one of the things that we made a decision early on was that we would record every podcast and we'd have it transcribed. So even in 2015, we started the podcast, there were natural language processing systems that would do podcast transcription for you. Now that may sound like a mundane thing, but I now have 150 episodes of me talking or having a conversation like this for an hour with some of the world's smartest people on some of the best topics. And what it allowed me to do is create this corpus of training data for modern AI systems. And so I've been using that data to really help these agents understand my voice, understand my thinking, my narrative structure, my voice, my tone, my, sort of the way I approach things. And so creating and having the agency to actually sit down and go, wait, what data do I have that could be really formative to help build these additional systems that, as new capabilities get launched in each of these AI platforms, how do I best take advantage of them? But more importantly, how do I best personalize them to where they become really, really powerful for me personally? And as you said, it's like I now have assistants that are the cost of the $20 a month,
Yeah.
kind of premium platform, that there's no possible way I could afford to pay that many interns to do the kinds of work they do for me that allow me to focus on those really high value tasks where my human uniqueness and intelligence can be applied and used in these creative functions that AI is never going to create. I mean, we've exhausted the human created data that could be used for AI. Like, we've scraped every blog, we've scraped all these things, but how do we make it personal and how do we make it useful for us? I think has been one of the biggest differentiators for me. And I think that's one of the biggest guidances I give to folks is like, step back and think about how could I personalize these tools? What data do I have that I've written, that I've spoken, that I can use to quickly help these tools learn to be more like me and give me more useful outputs?
Yeah. And then, it just, expands the way you think, right? So, I mean, there's, I noticed like when we were working with them, I think I talked to you a little bit about this with Harvard, where we had built what we called synthetic humans at the time, it was a couple of years ago. And they were the first documented synthetic humans in that kind of setting before biouniversity like that. And, the interactions that we had, the conversations that we had with these synths was mind blowing. But what was interesting was it wasn't that it just outthought us or gave us, all the ideas and then we were done. It actually unlocked limitless ideas that we never thought of and then went further than the synthetic human had. Now, maybe now, 2 years later, it's probably, it can do more than that. But at the time, the ideas were, incredibly powerful and they're very high level. But when I say high level, like higher level thinking, but when we were able to go to that level and then, then we could think, oh, wow, what if this, what if that, it just opened up a whole new realm. Right. And, it was almost like that, movie or TV show Limitless, it was like, this AI, it's not, maybe it's like this digital drug that just opens up, or this digital medication opens up, your thinking. And so you've talked about it as this unfair productivity edge, right? That's kind of one of the, I think, terms you use. I mean, it's not just productivity, but it takes you to a limitless place of thinking that, you never really were able to go before, right?
Yeah, it becomes an assistant that most of the tools today are PhD level. They're as good at any particular topic as most PhD students would be. And so I treat it much like hiring a fantastic PhD assistant, and it becomes a thought experiment guide. And I think one of the things that I always caution people though is like, it's a fantastic thought experiment partner, but at the end of the day, you have to own the outputs and you need to be the ultimate editor and owner of, whatever it is you choose to publish or say publicly. You have to have that human review. And that's why I think human in the loop or, treating AI as your like first draft agent is a super easy way to frame how to use the technologies to power your outcomes. And it's been super fun for me. I mean, like you said, some of the thought experiments, the ways that it can unlock, solving some mundane tasks that would take me time just to kind of grind through, where I can hand this off in real meaningful ways to focus my time back on high value activities. It's been an incredible unlock for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And, now as we're looking at these assistants, also termed, AI agents, right? And, Sam Altman, right, had said, we've kind of all heard the quote, that 2025 will be the year that, AI agents would enter the workforce. And, we're obviously seeing the rise of agentic AI and stuff like that, to almost a point where people, who are in the industry or just, keep hearing it, it's like kind of almost played out now. It's like, oh my God, but it's such a real thing.
It is.
We're building agents. You've met some of our agents, whether they're voice agents or what have you. And it's even blowing our minds, the stuff that we're building and seeing and what these capabilities of these agents can do. And so, when you look at this, rise of agentic AI, what are some of the cases of use cases that you're seeing or workflows or what have you?
Yeah, we're seeing it come alongside where there's talent gaps, where there are not enough people to do the work that are available today. And so one of the critical areas we see is, there is not enough cybersecurity professionals and IT operations people and, site reliability engineers. These are roles that are they're usually overworked. We don't have enough talent to do all the work that's really available to be done or needs to be done. And so that's an area where we're seeing a lot of adoption early on because there are known frameworks for dealing with things like in cybersecurity. How do you, detect a threat? How do you investigate it? How do you remediate it? There are known frameworks and data-driven ways that we approach it. And so those are really pretty straightforward use cases to say, that's a great place to go align AI agents to go do some of that work for us. Because if we have a small team of SOC engineers that are, responsible for security, they're probably overrun with alerts. And so how do you minimize the number of alerts? How do you get them focused on, if you have a bunch of folks who are great, but you don't have enough tier 1 analysts to do triage, let the agents do the triage for you and really raise up those important ones that need decision making brought to them. I think those are the areas where we're seeing some of the agents have early success is how do you just come alongside folks who are overworked? There's not enough of them to be hired. And how do you capture their intelligence as much as possible to do the lower level activities so that we focus their effort on the higher value things like, in security context, it might be detection engineering or building more automation that maybe AI is not capable of because it lacks the domain expertise or the domain knowledge in your particular organization. That's a great place to go send humans, but you can't send them if they're overworked on these lower level tasks. And so that's where agents get really interesting is, focusing intelligence in the right ways.
Yeah. And, on that note, you talked about just a moment ago around all the data that's been, consumed, right? The human generated data has pretty much been exhausted, right? And now we're kind of seeing this rise, not just of agentic AI, but maybe machine generated data and what that looks like. And so what should companies be thinking about that? Because that looks like the next horizon, right?
It really is. I think one of the things I do, to kind of delineate, because when I've said things like machine generated data before, sometimes folks conflate that with like synthetic data. So data created by AI tools. And that's not really what I'm referring to. And what we're talking about in terms of the next frontier of innovation is in machine generated data. What I mean is it's all the data being created by all these digital systems, these software applications, the devices, is really the next frontier of useful data for training the next generation of fit for purpose models. And so by that, I mean, it's not just about how do I build a large language model that can predict the right words to output based on a question, but how do I actually take a look at the telemetry patterns across digital systems and start to apply an AI tool that can actually understand in context what's happening from data to networking to compute to the way applications and systems use the data to the way users interact with those systems, and what are the optimal ways that those systems should be designed, run, protected, observed to drive the outcomes that we expect, which is most of us just really want to have a great experience with the digital systems we interact with. And so I think that data is really getting really interesting for organizations using it to actually automate many of the tasks that their teams are overrun dealing with. And I think that's what we mean with machine generated data in terms of potential is that it's take a hard look at the telemetry landscape you have about your operations and use it as an unlock. Because what we find is operations analytics has real business outcomes. Like if we make manufacturers more productive, those have significant bottom line improvements to an organization. If we make an application snappier, users enjoy it more and they're more likely to proceed through a cart and choose to buy with you. And so I think focusing on how do we apply this modern AI to these telemetry systems is a really powerful unlock for the enterprise.
Yeah. And we've been calling it in our company like deep harvesting, where we're really going down and getting those insights from what those agents are doing. And then we can learn and obviously optimize. But when you kind of look at the maybe the other side of the coin, there's I guess I don't know, maybe it's a Rubik's cube, but there's human generated data. There's this now machine generated data you're talking about that we need to make sure that we account for. But one of the things that's kind of been intriguing me is generative data, where AI could be creating its own data or own data sets to train itself on, learn on, and for whatever reason, or act on. And, how do you view that? I mean, what do you see as the pluses and minuses of that, the pitfalls or the cool things? Because I mean, is it something that's inevitably going to happen? Do you see AI doing it? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think it's already done. I mean, I think Meta recently invested pretty largely in Scale AI, like $14 billion or something like that. And so I think synthetic data and machine created data, I mean, synthetic data is absolutely kind of the next frontier. I think it's a quality conversation, but at the end of the day, I think it comes back to for what? Like, what are we using it for? Is it to improve the model accuracy? Is it to improve outcomes? Is it to shrink the models? Like, what are the problems, the business problems we're trying to solve? And I think it really comes down to being able to measure those and to observe what are the systems doing. Because I think it's one thing to say, oh, we fed the system new data, but so what? Like, what are we getting for it? And I think that's the question that organizations start to have to ask is like, are the large language models that are available today from the frontier providers that have been open sourced, are they already good enough to solve the problem you have? And while there are certain organizations that will have the ability to and the investment to go train this next generation of frontier models, I actually challenge people to think about more, how do I use the smallest possible model to drive the largest impact outcome to the business and the unit that I serve, as really the next frontier of innovation in the short term. It's like, there's plenty of folks who are going to continue to use this, petabytes and exabytes of, synthetic data to build frontier models. But you should be building systems that just has the ability to modularly use those improved models as they come online. But that's not the focus for most organizations. It's really driving the outcome and beginning with the why that I see most organizations kind of challenged with today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, probably the pressing question on a lot of people's minds, especially from your perspective, that I'm sure they'd love to hear this. When you have all that data and all those different, inputs that are coming and all these different systems. And along with that, obviously you've seen it in racing and all the things that you've been doing in your, infrastructure, as well as, your generative AI solutions, your agentic AI solutions and so forth. When you tie it all together, I think one of the biggest questions is it secure?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we have to continue to focus on, is that there's a lot of hype, and Gen AI is, folks are racing to put Gen AI solutions in any part of their platform. CEOs are saying, hey, I hear the buzz. I see in the Wall Street Journal that it's going to make us, X more productive. We should start slashing our, our budgets for headcount. And what we need to remember is that these new tools, these new AI systems, they're still digital, and they still are going to, if they're going to be installed in a part of our business process, a part of our workflow that is touching something that's revenue generating, customer facing, part of our value creation process, the CEO may be excited about it, but the board of directors and the CEO are going to care if it does something unnatural, if it does something to expose the brand to risk. And if it doesn't operate as it should, and it grants unlicensed access to data that you don't want in the open domains. And so I think like every digital system we've had for the last 40 years, the leaders have to ask that question: can I answer? Is it secure? And is it up and running as it should be? And how do I get there? Like, how do I start that process? So I think one of the things that we're seeing a massive demand in is, like, over the last 2 to 3 years, everybody's like, oh, we have to install AI. But we're just now starting to see the organizational sort of restructuring to where now HR and legal teams are starting to come work in concert with IT teams who are fielding the demand for, lines of business coming. I want this new AI tool. Like, hey, we have this provider that's built in this AI into their software. Can we use it? And we're just starting to really understand organizationally, how do you build a center of excellence that can look at those tools, make good decisions about the sovereignty of data, the access, the control systems in place to observe what's happening in the systems, to understand if it's right for our business? Does it meet our compliance standards? And I think we rushed, and there's been a little bit of a retraction over the last few years to say, maybe we do need to think about security and observability here. And what I would say to folks is, like, start with the basics. Like, understand how to instrument these modern systems. It's probably very similar to, other instrumentation tools you've used for modern applications. Get the data in a place where you can understand the operational, activities that are happening. You can understand, packet to packet, what's happening across the network, so that you can apply those same security principles you did to cloud. They have to be applied to AI as well.
Yeah. Maybe let's talk about the global view of it for a minute. Like, and it's not just companies that have to, think about security, of course, and a lot of things you talked about, even reinforceability and so forth. But now, we're seeing the rise of government leaders who are trying to take their nation to be a AI first nation or whatever it is, but they're also maybe almost worried or freaking out about the security and stuff. How I know you guys are, right there to help, but like, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think the security control is going to persist for a long time, because I think it's still humans that are interacting with these systems. And I think humans are prone to confidence in these systems. So they're probably prone to share things that maybe they shouldn't. And so that's why I think that, security practitioners, leaders, organizational kind of owners should be thinking about, how do I deploy tools that I can put through a compliance process that are safe, and I understand how they're deployed, what we're granting access to. But then it kind of follows this security concept of trust but verify, right? So trust that the onboarding process that you've used to assess the tools, assess their data usage, their compliance and deployment, but verify. So allow your teams to use the tools, but then also instrument how they're using it. So intercept it at the user level to make sure that you're not having folks just share things they shouldn't. And I'll give you examples. Like, a lot of folks were worried about, I might actually have a developer who goes out to ChatGPT to ask for help in writing some code who might copy and paste, some code that's very proprietary to my software. But the reality is that people have been doing that for years with Stack Overflow and GitHub and others. And so there's more natural sort of data loss prevention technologies that we should be thinking about, even in the AI world, which is how do I build firewalls and usage access at the user and at the network and at the application interface level to intercept what that data is and to in real time run processes to say, is this the kind of data that I want my teams exposing to these tools or not? And so I think that's one of them that's just like a really critical component. It's like you should absolutely go through a trust process to ensure that you have the right compliant tools in place. And if you want to use tools to advance your government's activities, then you should have a compliance officer and a legal team and HR assessing those. But you should also be implementing those security tools to look at it at that usage and network layer to really understand how people are actually interacting with the systems to constantly verify that they're doing the right things.
Yeah. And it's interesting around trust, right? So you have these, now AI, so there's a side of this where it's, the trust you mentioned, and then there's the other side, like how do we trust AI, right? So a lot of people talk about hallucinations, and it's always one of the first things that we always hear as well. And it's interesting because as they're becoming more aware, it gets a little bit more interesting, right? Because before we were in this era of maybe ANI, the artificial narrow intelligence, we all hear about AGI now, artificial general intelligence. We may be in it or we may be very close to it, and then of course ASI, artificial superintelligence, and the stories that are in the media, are like, like this one AI agent didn't want to get, or this AI didn't want to get shut down. So it, tried to blackmail the developer, or it maybe lied to, cover up what it was doing or whatever, and your hat, obviously truth, again, going back to that, do they tell the truth, or, how do we ensure that,
I think it comes back to that understanding, observing what the systems are doing really deeply and understanding their access, understand their deployment. And I think that that's really a critical component of any of this is like, are we instrumenting to deeply understand, like there's an argument that like some of these large language models are black boxes, like we really don't understand how we got there. We don't understand their thinking, but we can certainly understand their usage. Like if we have something like ChatGPT Operator, where it actually has a browser that it's going and using, we have tools like real user monitoring capabilities that are open source and proprietary tools that can absolutely monitor browser usage. And so I think just applying those same instrumentation, observability, security practices to, deeply understand and bring observability and instrumentation to those systems is step one, because you can't troubleshoot, you can't protect, you can't stop what you can't see and measure. And so I think practitioners have to go back to that like really basic lens of, have I done a good job of instrumenting these tools so that if they do go rogue, that I have the ability to start to sense when that's happening from data that's maybe in an air-gapped system that's operational monitoring that system. I would say that the one, sort of interesting story there about the things going offline is like, or the thing violating rules is, that's what every sci-fi movie talks about long-term is like, they all start with these good set of rules in place, but they end up figuring out ways to violate them. And so I think at the end of the day, data doesn't lie. And so if you have a good understanding of how the AI is using data, how it's operating, that you can deeply instrument it, it at least gives us a chance to really understand how to troubleshoot.
Yeah, man, look, I can talk about this all day with you, man. I hope to continue the conversation too. But as we're getting, closer to the end of this time, maybe a little bit more about, where you're heading, what you're thinking around what's next. Like, so for instance, what probably is the thing that excites you the most that you want to build next?
Yeah, I think at Splunk and Cisco, we have this really unique opportunity to bring together what is an interesting part of the AI infrastructure that I don't think maybe all of us have thought about as being most important. Obviously, Cisco and network engineers for years have said, the network is the computer, but I'm really excited to see how we actually use telemetry from those networking systems to better understand these AI tools and usage patterns. And so I'm really excited to see how that comes together. I'm excited to see what happens in the quantum universe as we start to see quantum computing to come together, because I think it represents some really interesting challenges for cryptography and modern security in ways that is going to be really interesting to see how we approach, especially if those tools are accelerated when you see quantum and AI come together. I think that's going to be an interesting confluence. And I think at the end of the day, we believe, and I'm kind of excited to see us build really that network intelligence to understand how the systems are coming together and how we apply AI to advance outcomes more specifically for our users. I think it's going to be really fun. For me personally, I'm excited to be part of that journey. I'm excited to see our product and engineering teams get like laser focused on this data problem we have ahead of us, because these AI systems are growing. The industrial systems required to support them are growing. I see an explosion of machine generated data. And we at Splunk have built this really interesting platform for dealing with petabyte scale volumes of machine generated data. And so we've got some really exciting announcements coming at our conference in September that are really going to showcase how we're using that scale to deploy and build this machine generated data AI to go solve some really interesting challenges. So it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so people can go to splunk.com and they can see that, and so I think, because that's going to be big, right?
It's going to be exciting.
It's going to be really exciting. And you guys are building so much stuff, and the new platform that, there's probably new platforms all the time, but that the way it's been integrated into Cisco, has that, been pretty exciting?
It's been really exciting. Actually, in the AI space, one of the most interesting developments of the last few years has been, if the concept of the agentic enterprise is going to come true, which we all think it is, right? There's going to be lots of agents. We want to play a good role in that, in the sense that, we want to absolutely be a partner to help secure and protect AI as it's deployed. But we also want to give people the ability to use and access the data that we have in an agentic way. And so we've started abiding by some pretty broad standards. There's things like, for the tech geeks out there, model context protocol is a standard for how we integrate agentic systems. And we've started actually building, and we've launched it recently, an MCP server right within Splunk. So now, folks can actually interact with Splunk without ever logging in. They can actually go into, the browser, which kind of the browser's been the way that most folks are landing on, using AI tools. It's through, visiting chatgpt.com or Claude or Gemini, whatever. But now we can actually integrate and give folks the ability to access our agents and access data in Splunk without ever leaving that browser experience. So if they get an email and it's like, hey, there's been a security alert, that was fired from a Cisco device or from Splunk, they can actually start asking questions right within Claude or right within ChatGPT. Cool. And it can actually go start to ask the agents from Splunk to help. And so we've taken an approach to really build a unified set of agents across Cisco and Splunk together. We actually took a pause about a year ago on kind of our underlying architecture to really bring those together, to make sure that we built a consistent way that they're deployed, that they would have consistent integration capabilities. And so I think really when you bring the power of a company as large and broadly deployed as Cisco with a platform like Splunk that's so good at dealing with data, combining that with some massive investments we've made in AI development and engineering, and we actually even have launched our own frontier models for security and networking that are being put into production, I think it really presents a kind of an unprecedented opportunity for us to play a part in that agentic enterprise, both securing it, but also giving access to agents in a way that nobody else has thought about.
Yeah. So no, it's mind blowing. and one of the things I hear, throughout a lot of the things you've been saying is, all the different angles that you're thinking on it, and really, the ways you've approached it in so many diverse aspects. Obviously, building such diverse teams as well, and you've literally worn many hats, and clearly you have a whole hat collection too. Very cool, which I love. And with all those hats, there's a lot of, juggling and transitioning and changes you have to do, just on a day-to-day basis. Right. And lots of people don't get to, figure out how to make that as smooth as you do or whatever in their daily life. And at the same time, you've also led, innovative, efforts. You've overcome a myriad of challenges. You've, like Prompting Potential, the podcast itself, we talk about is, you've been that entrepreneur to be able to drive change and so forth, but it's not without its obstacles, it's not without its setbacks, it's not without its, skepticism. And so how do you overcome those things and at the same time balance your ability to be technical and to be, a communicator publicly and all the things you're doing,
Yeah, I think one of the ways that I've thought about and really focused on driving hard things like challenges, right? How do we drive change? How do we get people to, come alongside an idea? If I kind of think about an area of technology that I think is going to change what we should be doing, how the world is going to work, how customers are going to interact with us, you have to get people on the journey with you. It's, any sort of major change requires people, and it requires, investment in their time and energy. And they probably have to give up something that they're working on to, enable the change that you're seeking. And so I've always kind of operated in this idea. I really like Simon Sinek's idea of like, begin with why.
Yeah.
Like, why do we need to change? What's the motivation? Make sure that the understanding of that change really is connected to an outcome that matters, right? Make sure that the outcome you're driving matters to the organization you're in, the industry you're operating in, your personal, sort of brand. Make sure that you're connected to something that matters, and then make sure that it's really easy for folks to come alongside, to where it matters to them. And so I've really focused on that why, like, why do we need to make the change? Meeting people where they are and trying to help them see that the change is good. That's based in having great research and data to back up an idea, but it's also just understanding the human side of it. Like, hey, what's in it for them? And are really understanding each of those conversations when you have to go challenge people to potentially give something up to go work on this new idea. It's like, make it worth it, right? And don't forget that these people are people at the end of the day that want to feel good about the thing that they're doing. They want to feel like it's important. So I think it's really been a focus on, making sure that the ideas are bathed in good research and data, but that they don't forget that really human side of it, that any change does require, humans to come along the journey and everybody be pulling on the same rope. And how do you do that? You meet them where they are. And then you also think about like how you communicate to them. That's one of the things that I've kind of made a goal for myself, is to really communicate in the ways that make sense to the people by learning their patterns. And I'll give you an example. We had this big idea a couple of years ago. No one got to get the depth of it, but one of the things we learned was one of our executives did not really like sitting in a bunch of long meetings, didn't really like, having to read these 2-page like narratives ahead of time. But we found out that he was really, the best way to engage with him was to send like a 2 to 3 minute video to him to us on text message. Because what he would do is he would actually watch those while he was on the treadmill every morning to like start to understand messages. Right. And that was one of those unique learnings, by getting to know him, getting to know how he was, encouraged, and then framing the narrative in a way that was video format, right? Don't be afraid to engage those new mediums to meet people where they are. Really help drive some of that change. So I think it's be a student of the game, always be a student of how do humans get invited on a journey.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So lightning round. Yep. I love to ask these questions. So what's one risk you're glad you took?
I'm really glad I took the risk of starting that podcast years ago. Yeah. It was one that, podcasts weren't all that big of a thing, honestly. In 2015, there were some, but it was a risk that I thought I was taking alone. I found out very quickly that there were other people who were in similar positions that were thinking similarly about the market, that I ended up becoming really close friends with, that we actually built something I thought was really cool. And it was a risk because we had to have some, really serious conversations with employers to make sure that they were like not viewing this as a competitive thing. But it was one that was a massive amount of time, energy, and effort. But it was one of the best learning experiences of my life, that I built some skills that I probably wouldn't have built otherwise, whether that's my now love of audio video technology that I'm a total geek for, that's actually unlocked some really cool things for me in my job of being able to produce high quality audio and video, comes from my podcast days. But it's actually made me a better leader of technologists because I can meet people where they are. Yeah. Not everybody wants to look at my stupid face on a Zoom call. They maybe want to, hear me, in a podcast. They may want to see, a video. They may want to, interact differently. So that risk paid off in a lot of ways long-term. That's been really good for me.
Yeah. Well, it is a cool beard, by the way. So a book, podcast, or maybe an idea that has shaped your thinking.
I am a big fan of the All In podcast these days, partially because I like the altitude that is something I don't have. Those are the hosts of the podcast are all, mostly billionaire founders of some of the most interesting tech companies. They're working at levels that are leading VC firms. One of the folks is now the chief or the czar for AI and crypto for the president. Yeah. And they operate at an altitude and have a visibility to trends and macroeconomic and developments that I probably just wouldn't have in my seat in the world, in my seat in technology, that I think is really formative to understand the big macros, because it really helps me understand the why of where things are happening in the markets, what's happening in AI and infrastructure to support it, and governments around the world that are driving a lot of the change we see. So I think it's a really quality listen. If you're in leadership, if you're operating in technology, it's a really unique lens to really get a take on the world.
Okay, cool. So finish the sentence.
Yeah.
Prompting potential means
having the agency to understand how to use AI to make you a better version of you.
I love it. Awesome. Man, Cory, thanks for being on the show.
Absolutely.
I've been, just so fascinated with all the things that you've been talking about, but more than that, just inspired by who you are as a person. The times that we've even chatted and spent outside of just producing this or being on this set has been really special. You have an incredible, inspiration that you bring to a lot of people, but, energy, charisma, but heart, and I love that. So, I'm sure people would love to connect with you or follow you. How do they do that?
LinkedIn's the easiest one. I'm pretty active on there. So just literally it's like linkedin.com/Cory Minton.
All right, man. Well, we're going to keep the conversation going, and hopefully we're going to get some really awesome barbecue at some point too.
Let's go.
All right. Cool. Wow. Cory just blew my mind. He didn't just bring the tech, but he brought the thinking behind the tech. From trackside telemetry to AI platforms, from podcasting to platform strategy, Cory's story is a reminder that tech works best when it helps people rise and amplifies their potential. So to everyone listening, stay curious, stay human, and keep prompting your potential. If you want to find out more about us at Chai, go to heychai.ai. See you next time.